What's going on, everyone? It is AxelBeats here for AnimeUproar, and recently we did a video covering the Phantom Troop of Hunter x Hunter. And since you guys seem to enjoy that so much, today we'll be ranking what I consider to be the 20 best Nen abilities in the series. If you enjoy this video and you want to see more Hunter x Hunter content on this channel, remember to leave a like as well as a comment down below. It only takes a second, but it really does help with the YouTube algorithm. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to AnimeUproar, make this the video that you do by clicking that bell and selecting all notifications. You can also follow AnimeUproar on Twitter and Instagram at AnimeUproar, or you can follow myself at ExcellianYT. Finally, this video will contain spoilers, so please proceed with caution. You have been warned. So off the bat, we need to set some ground rules. Nen is nothing if not varied, and as such, it can be kinda difficult to compare something that can be used purely to play dodgeball or to create a giant Bodhisattva. Nen is very fluid, versatile, and creative, so judging it purely based on destructive power doesn't really paint a good picture in my opinion. In general though, I'm going to try and make the list based on a couple of things. Yes, partly how strong it is, but I'm going to include how versatile and usable it is as well. Something like Razor's 14 Devils or Komugi's evolving Gungi skills are totally great in their own rights, but how useful are they in general situations? That's something I'm going to try and think about. Secondly, I'm only allowing one ability per character on this list. So for example, if Biscuit's magical spa is on here, then her body transformation cannot be. And of course, I'm going to be talking about the abilities themselves, not the characters, although if it does suit the character very well, that's a bonus. But if you would like to see me ranking Nen users specifically, let us know in the comments and I'll try and talk Animac and Gozen into it. Now, before we get into the actual video though, I do want to cover some honorable mentions as well as explaining why they didn't make the cut. Firstly, one that's probably going to upset a few people because it's a main character ability, let's talk about Gon's transformation. By giving up his ability to use Nen in the future, as well as much of his life energy, Gon was able to summon all of the power he will eventually have and grow in age. While this is nearly god tier powerful for a short time, it also comes at such a huge cost. Anything that can only be used once and then turns off Nen forever, in this series specifically, is definitely going to lose some points. Not to mention, Gon falls into a coma that would have killed him without life support and Nanika's intervention. Despite this being a fan favorite ability, it just has too many drawbacks that are way too serious. Killua's Godspeed is another one. By allowing his Nen to manipulate his movement, Killua gains a ton of speed. Basically, this works in two parts. Firstly, his Nen will force his muscles to move to dodge incoming attacks and react to them, and second, he has more active control over it to gain lightning speed. The electricity shooting off his aura will also shock or even burn his opponents or allies if he's carrying them to some degree. Now this all seems great, but the downside of Killua's ability comes in the amount of aura he has. Killua just doesn't have a huge supply, and this drains him a lot. These issues combined means that he can only use this very briefly, and it can kinda just end unexpectedly, leaving him open. This is a great technique, but much like Gon's, this is just a very all or nothing move. Sure, it doesn't put him in a coma, but if this doesn't do the job, he's kinda screwed. Pito is another fan favorite character, and while their Nen abilities are pretty useful, they all kinda fall flat in some places. Dr. Blythe allows Pito to perform surgery on someone to heal them, however, it isn't really a quick process, and Blythe themselves is immobile and tied to Pito's tail, meaning they have to stay in a pretty small area for the entirety of its use. She can also attach Blythe to a person to control them, even being able to force them to speak or use Nen. Finally, Pito can use Puppet Master Serenity to essentially use puppeteering on themselves, raising their offensive abilities in general. While all of these are fairly solid, there are just better versions of each of these present in many of the characters throughout the list, so as a package, sure, it's great, but individually, it's just kind of a jack of all trades and master of none kind of thing. Our final honorable mention is manga-based, with Camilla's Cat Who Lived a Million Times. This is an ability I find to be both incredibly interesting and useful, but it's so situational that it just can't really make the list. In the event that Camilla is killed, a Nen cat will appear behind the one who killed her and completely obliterate the murderer, stealing their life force and then feeding it back to Camilla. This will revive her and heal her to some degree, but again, only if she actually dies. More specifically, if she is killed. She could be tortured, beaten, and left on the verge of death, and her Nen would do nothing. And it's this limitation that really stops her from being super effective, and it stops her from being on this actual list. But with that said, let's get on to our real entries. So starting off the list at number 20, we have something which might be a little bit weird to some people, but I'm choosing Biscuit's Magical Spa Services. While this obviously isn't the strongest combat-oriented ability, it is easily one of the most useful abilities in the series. Biscuit summons a masseuse named Cookie, who's able to revitalize people, stop their fatigue, heal minor diseases like arthritis, and burn off fat. It can even give you a massage that changes the effect of 30 minutes of sleep into feeling like 8 hours. This is genuinely very useful just in day-to-day life, but in a more effective and practical way, it's also very useful for intensive training, which is how we see Biscuit using it throughout the series. Yes, this isn't useful in a fight, but I think all of the benefits that this offers more than makes up for that. In 19th place, we have another kind of supportive ability with Machi's Nen Stitches. This is another one that's kind of oriented towards healing, and it's just insanely powerful. Using threads made of Nen, Machi can sew up injuries much like normal stitches. However, the healing properties are so much stronger. Even in cases where people's arms have been entirely cut off, Machi can still sew them back on, and the newly reattached limb is functional immediately. And I just think that anything that can reattach a missing limb is probably pretty phenomenal. While it's not being taken into consideration for this specific ability, she can also use these threads more offensively to capture opponents or manipulate them. Whether you want to consider that in the stitching ability or Nen threads in general is kind of up to you, but even in isolation, this is just a very strong and useful technique. At 18, we have something that many people might think is a little bit higher up, but I'm putting Phaeton's Rising Sun here. While there is usually something to be said about versatility in general, sometimes a flaming spirit bomb of destructive power is all you really need. The more damage that Phaeton has taken, the more powerful Rising Sun is. The downside being that while this is strong enough to vaporize enemies, it could also affect himself if he wasn't in his armor. This also goes for any of his friends or allies nearby. Between the possibility that this can easily go wrong, and the very straightforward one kind of use that this ability has, it's just unfortunate that it can't go higher up. Again, much like Machi, if we're taking into consideration the rest of Phaeton's abilities, specifically through Painpacker, he has the potential to do a lot more. We've only really seen 1 or 2 forms of Painpacker, so really who knows what else he can do. But for now, Rising Sun is falling into 18th. At number 17, we have an incredibly powerful ability in Chrollo Lucifer's Bandit Secret. Honestly, due to their similarities, it was between including Bandit Secret or Meruem's Aura Synthesis. I think as a general ability, Aura Synthesis is probably dozens of times stronger. However, it's kind of wasted on Meruem. It allows him to absorb the Nen of those that he eats, adding it to his own power, but the thing is, Meruem is already basically unlimited when it comes to Nen, and he's already much stronger than really anyone else in the series. The only effort that he really had to put in for his fight with Netero was keeping his opponent alive, and who else is really going to compete with him at that point? The best example I can give for what I mean here is it's kind of like if you gave The Rock steroids before he took part in an arm wrestling tournament against preschoolers. Yeah, sure, it'll help, but why? So if his ability could be given to anyone in general, sure, but because it's on Meruem, I don't think it's very valuable actually. Instead, we're going to go with Bandit Secret. By going through a very complicated list of limitations and procedures, Chrollo is able to steal the Nen abilities of living people and store them within his book. He can use up to 2 of these abilities at once, but once the person has died, they are removed from the book. While this can be very, very strong, it's honestly more about the versatility that this offers. The obvious downside is that there are so many limitations involved in getting the new abilities, using them, and keeping them, because if the person dies, it's gone. Even with those limitations considered though, it definitely helps Chrollo be much more efficient, much more effective, and it definitely fits his character very well as he leads the Phantom Troop, using their abilities for his will, and Bandit Secret is just kind of that embodied as Nen. With that said though, like I said earlier, if you feel that aura synthesis is better for this list, I totally get it. Number 16 goes to one of the most interesting abilities I've ever seen in anime with Knuckles' APR. Once Knuckle manages to make contact with an enemy, he can place this adorable little guy on them and gift them some of his own aura. From here, APR will keep a counter of how much aura they were given, as well as how much interest has accrued. Every 10 seconds, the amount owed is increased by 10%, quickly ramping up until paying it back is actually impossible, at which point they hit bankruptcy. From here, APR will transform, and for the next 30 days the target will be unable to use Nen unless APR is removed. Furthermore, until APR actually transforms, the person that it's attached to is unable to deal damage to Knuckle, and instead will only be paying off their interest with each hit. That said, the amount of damage they would have to actually do to pay back all of the aura quickly gets out of hand. I really like this ability because it's very easy to set up, and its only limitation is buying time. On top of that, it's just super clever and unique and very effective, and I absolutely love it. Number 15 is one I find extremely creepy, being Illumi's Needle People. By sticking needles into the head of a person and then giving them an order, Illumi is able to create a more or less zombie which works for him until they die or complete a task. He can also put a second needle in the person to make them more capable, being able to speak or drive, things like that. However, the true value of this is the sheer number of people he can implant this in. This isn't exactly a one-person type of thing, and instead he can create an entire army if he wants to. And making an army of zombie slaves is a pretty solid ability. Of course, just like Machi and Phaeton, which I'm picking up a theme with the Phantom Troop members, Illumi can also do a few other things with his needles if he wants, which aren't really being taken into consideration here, things like disguising himself, for example. They do offer a pretty wide variety of abilities, but for right now we're only focusing on Needle People specifically. At 14, we have Bonalenov's Battle Cantabile. Now, Bonalenov's body is kind of unique in that it has holes scattered entirely throughout it. These holes are very useful for him though, as while he dances and moves throughout a battlefield, wind will start blowing through them, and music will be made. This music has some very diverse effects on his environment. For example, he can conjure up some warrior garb and a spear, but more iconic for his character, I think, is the ability to create a miniature Jupiter to crush whoever is in earshot of him. Fighting an enemy who is using sound as a weapon is incredibly hard to avoid, and when they can drop a mini planet on you just because you heard them, you're probably not in a great spot. While this ability isn't the most flashy or most complex thing in the world, it is surprisingly effective for what it is. At number 13, we have a Chimera Ant Royal Guard with Shiapoof and his Beelzebub. This is just kind of a very useful and versatile ability. The basics of it allow Poof to break down into many mini versions of himself, really getting as small as he'd like to. However, at the point where he becomes smaller than a fly, he is no longer able to see. All of these mini versions of himself are still controlled by himself simultaneously, in very much a kind of hive mind mentality. On top of that, if any of them are destroyed by physical force, they can just be reformed. That said, if they are destroyed by something like fire or electricity, the healing isn't really an easy process, if it can happen at all. This ability can be used to overwhelm opponents purely through numbers, escape from traps or cages, dodge attacks, or spy on enemies. Just the wide range of options that this offers, especially in someone in Shiapoof's role, is an invaluable tool for the character. Kite's Crazy Slot is our number 12, which basically turns him into Mr. Game & Watch from Smash Bros. A roulette spins granting him a number between 1 and 9, giving him a random weapon associated with that number. We have seen that to include a scythe, a mace, and a gun. However, we have 6 other forms we don't really know about. Each of these weapons is very powerful, and Kite is a master with all of them, making this a very good mix of versatility and power. The downside of this is that obviously it is still very random, so despite the fact that Kite is a master with each one of these tools individually, some are better suited to situations than others, just by design. In the majority of cases though, he should be pretty fine, as long as there aren't any cats around. And our final Chimera Ant Royal Guard is Yuppie, coming in at our number 11 spot. His Rage Incarnate ability allows him to finally be able to focus and control his anger and power. Up until he had this transformation, he would basically rampage chaotically. Yuppie's destructive power is unbelievable, but he typically can't really control it. However, in this situation, he nearly perfects himself, granting him more control over his transformations, strengths, and rage blasts. While this ability is kinda straightforward and just a direct power-up, it works very well for his character as it fixes all the issues that he previously had. And an ability that fills in all the holes of your combat flaws is very, very useful. Now, breaking into the top 10 is what is said to be the ultimate 1v1 ability with Hulkenberg's Possession Arrow. This is unfortunately a manga-only ability. Hulkenberg uses his subordinate's aura to produce both immensely powerful armor and an arrow. The arrow is possessed by his subordinate's spirit and will exist until it lands on the target. On top of this, it flies at incredible speeds that are nearly impossible to dodge, and has enough power behind it to pierce any armor or Nen ability. In general, this ability supplies him with both top-tier defense and offensive abilities, and just based on these stats alone, it kinda has to be top 10 for me. Number 9 is one which might surprise you, but it is Nov's Hide and Seek. It might not be the most deadly ability, but the utility that this offers and the ability to create a pocket dimension with multiple sections to it is just about as good as you can get. He can hold a large number of people inside, and doors can be set up ahead of time, making this essentially a secret tunnel that, for the most part, cannot be detected. Which, I don't know, if you're trying to fight a war against Chimera ants, would be a great way to get into their territory. It's good for hiding, mobility, storage, and so much more that there are very few abilities in the series that offer utility and versatility in the way that Hide and Seek does. Honestly, the only downside of Hide and Seek is that it takes this ability's name away from Jing, who, you know, as an awful father, hides from his seeking son. Number 8, we have another manga entry with Morena's Contagion. If you thought Needle People was strong, this is kinda that on steroids. Using her saliva, she can infect up to 22 people to take part in a game. As these infected people kill, they will level up a certain amount based on who or what they killed, gaining aura, and at level 20, they will even develop a new Nen ability. Once these people hit level 100, they will all become able to spread this infection to others, essentially turning this into a giant pyramid scheme. Being able to produce Nen abilities on such a large scale, as well as having an ability herself that can spread to so many people, gives her so much potential that I think number 8 is pretty reasonable. Number 7 is my personal favorite on the list, and it's our second last manga entry, but unfortunately it comes with a name that is very difficult to say. Prince Zaridnich has Parallel Future. With this, he can close his eyes and instantaneously see the next 10 seconds of time. He can keep his eyes closed to continue the vision, but it will only progress at normal speed from there, so he will always be 10 seconds ahead. After he uses this ability, time will progress normally for everyone else. However, he is able to change his actions to better suit the situation, and no one will notice those changes until time is caught up. Effectively meaning that for 10 seconds, he functionally can move outside of time while everyone else continues on like nothing has changed. This could make him a JoJo's villain. It is absolutely crazy how strong this ability is. It allows you to move without being noticed, see the future to dodge upcoming threats, and even attack your opponents without them knowing about it for a few seconds. Number 6 goes to Benjamin's Baton, belonging to Benjamin, and he is our last manga ability. With this, Benjamin is able to inherit the Nen abilities of his private army when their original users die. This is kind of like a much more free and useful version of Chrollo's book, while actually adding to his power in a way that matters, unlike with Meruem. This ability seems like it has unlimited potential to gather abilities, under the condition that members of his personal army die. But they are soldiers, so the likelihood of that happening is pretty reasonable. While the downside of this ability is having to wait for someone else to die, the upside is that it never seems to fade away, unlike in Chrollo's situation. We are starting off our top 5 with what is probably the most famous ability in the series, offering more utility, versatility, and functionality than just about any other, and incorporating creativity in a way that very few other abilities do. Hisoka's Bungee Gum, which holds the power of both rubber and gum, can bounce back projectiles, sling objects, act as a bungee to draw enemies in, repel himself, glue himself to the ground to give him leverage, pull back weapons that he has thrown, stop his own bleeding, temporarily reattach missing limbs, bring himself back to life by resuscitating his own heart and lungs, launch himself forward towards enemies, or back away to escape, and that's like not even half of it. This ability really is only limited to Hisoka's creativity in a way that nothing else in the series really is. And despite its simplicity on the surface, it is one of the most powerful and useful abilities available due to how many options actually are presented. Our number 4 could honestly be swapped with Bungee Gum, but here we have Kurapika's Emperor Time. This is kinda like Kurapika's version of Gon's transformation. It's an ability that drastically increases his own performance at the cost of his own life. The major difference here being that Kurapika's only costs him 1 hour of life for every second in this mode. So, it works out to about 1 week of his life every 3 minutes of use. While this is still a lot of time to lose, it is very different context for the character using it. Gon is this bright and joyful person with a lust for life, and Kurapika really doesn't care what happens to himself as long as he can get revenge on the Phantom Troop. While in most cases I would say this is way lower on the list purely based on the cost, in Kurapika's specific situation I think it is totally reasonable. So, what does the ability actually do? Well, Emperor's Time raises the force and accuracy of all Nen categories, while keeping the level the same. Basically, it allows him to make proficient use of every type of Nen, even if he doesn't have much expertise. Now, it's important to note that it doesn't make you a master of that category, it only boosts your performance at your current level. This is super complicated to explain, and unfortunately the best way I can actually represent it is with a Pokemon reference. So, imagine you have a level 30 Pichu. Using Emperor Time basically boosts that to a level 30 Raichu. You aren't going to level 100, but your performance will still be drastically improved. I hope that makes sense. This is genuinely the best I can do. Moving into our top 3, I promise there will be no more Pokemon references. We have what is probably unanimously one of the strongest abilities in the series, with Netaro's Bodhisattva. While it is mostly immobile, it allows for devastating sets of attacks with near-endless patterns and incredible speed. Anyone other than Meruem probably wouldn't have been able to deal with this because it's just so oppressive. The only weakness that this ability has is that Netero has an unconscious tendency to rely on specific patterns, and Meruem picked up on it. Furthermore, anyone other than Netero probably wouldn't have been able to make full use of the technique due to the speed required to actually use it efficiently. In Netero's hands, though, it is easily very high up on everyone's list, and I think you'd be crazy not to have it in your top 5. With that said, though, I can understand people putting it as low as number 5, based on the restrictions of immobility, the need for speed, and the size of the ability. Regardless, though, without question, this is a devastatingly powerful Nen ability. Our runner-up is probably going to surprise a lot of people, but Morel's Deep Purple takes this easily to me. And to be honest, it is kind of the last fair entry in this list. This ability is probably the only thing with more versatility than Bungee Gum, and along with that versatility, it also adds a lot of complexity. All of Deep Purple's abilities revolve around smoke, which Morel can manipulate however he wants. He can make items such as ropes, plants like grass, animals like rabbits, or even people who are capable of speech and who are individually very strong and fast as well. On top of that, he can change its color and camouflage it into its surroundings. He can make them as durable as they need to be the point where they're almost indestructible, or he can make up to 216 dolls by spreading his aura very thin. But he can also make that number much smaller to make much stronger smoke people. Just the range and possibility that comes with this ability is phenomenal. There's no real restriction on it. You're able to create whatever you want, and for as subtle as an ability as it is, it just kind of dominates any situation you might find it in. For the versatility, possibility, and just overall usefulness of this Nen ability in every situation, it has to be my runner-up. And our number 1 is Nanika's Wish Granting. I can totally understand people putting this a bit lower, as Nanika themselves is kind of a strange existence with their own set of rules. However, to me, this is just on a different league. Nanika can take control of Alika to grant one wish for someone, and there is likely no limit to what she can do. For example, she can make people float teleport them to another continent, and she was even able to remove the condition of Gon's transformation and heal him. It really doesn't stop there, as Killua even explains that there's probably nothing she can't do. The cost of this wish is the next person that Alika requests something to has to complete 3 tasks for her, even if they are completely separate of the situation entirely. If the requests are declined 4 times, other people will die as a result, with the minimum being 2 people, being the person that Alika is making a request to, and the person that they love most. Both of them will instantly be crushed to death. Following that, more and more people will die depending on the size of the previous wish. Those people are decided based on who has spent most time with the person Alika is requesting things to, even if they aren't good friends. These people will all be wrung out to death. On top of all of that, Killua has his own ability to offer commands rather than wishes, which have their own set of conditions that are much lighter. While the possible backlash is definitely something to consider, I mean, the ability to warp reality and fulfill any wish without the wisher paying the cost directly is probably something that is impossible to really rank fairly. The only real restriction on Nanika is that she needs to take control of Alika and that she can't make wishes for herself. But outside of that, unlimited power and possibility are kind of on the table, and that's why she's my number 1. And there you have it, my opinion on what are the 20 best Nen abilities throughout Hunter x Hunter. Obviously this is kind of subjective, as Nen is very, very tricky. Again, this is not just based on pure power, but how useful it is, how much versatility it offers, stuff like that is also being taken into consideration. Regardless of that though, I think that it's pretty hard to argue that any of these abilities aren't insanely powerful and amazing in their own rights though. But if you think that some of them should have been higher or lower, or maybe some other abilities should have made this list, be sure to let me know down in the comments, because I would love to see some of your takes on different Nen abilities. And again, if you would like to see a video on the top 20 Nen users, then let us know that as well. If you enjoyed this video though and want to see more Hunter x Hunter content in the future on this channel, remember to leave a like, and if you're new to AnimeUproar, remember to subscribe and ring that bell. By selecting all notifications, you can help guarantee that you will not miss any videos in the future, and of course you can always follow AnimeUproar at AnimeUproar on Twitter and Instagram, or you can follow myself at AxelYT. I want to give a big thank you to all of our AnimeUproar patrons who make videos like this one possible. Special thanks to Alpha Sigma, who is an absolute mad lad and disciple of Lord Twigo himself. And of course the 1-tier patrons, the ones who rise above all other clans. These being Ingrata, Patehefa, Aljatal, Hinokami and Water, The Toasted Chi, The Spike 8227, Dylan Isidore, Spidey Life Tanel, Tungsten Tarkus, Baked Buddhist, and Monkey D. Quilly. And finally, thank you to all of our Pro Hero tier patrons, the one and only Gilgamesh, the Red-Haired Raven, Angel Cruz, Rathuin De Ora, Very Gucci, Alicia Octor, Bonnie Parks, Joanne Garcia, Ted Not Ted, Fatboy Games, Corey McGowan, and Soul Ray Slice and Dice. If you enjoy our videos and feel like they provide some kind of value to you, please consider checking out our Patreon through the link in the description. Anyone who supports the channel with even a single dollar has access to our exclusive Patreon-only Discord, and your name will appear at the end of videos just like all of these phenomenal people. But for now, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, remember to stay Axel.